sit back down. Stay a bit.
Okay.
You do know Cermak was ours, right? That Al put that Polak's fat ass in office. But now this fair is coming, this World's Fair. A lot of money to be made. Whores, gambling, and beer right there on the fairgrounds, if it's legal by then. Or if not, in the speaks. Either way, it's our beer they'll be drinking. Now the city fathers want 10% Tony Cermak to clean up the town, but how can Tony do that and give people what they want?
Like whores and gambling and beer?
Like whores and gambling and beer. I'll tell you how. By putting the screws to the old Capone mob. Feds got a lot of mileage out of sending Al up.
So, Cermak teams up with the smaller mobs then. Roger Toohey, Ted Newberry, small fry he can control.
And throw us to the goddamn wolves. The outfit that made the son of a bitch.
I don't doubt you're right, Mr. Nitty. But what does it have to do with me?
I just thought you might like to know Ted Newberry put up 15 grand for anybody who'd bump me. Open fucking contract.
You sure of this?
I don't bullshit with 3 leaking wounds in me. Added to all the different ways the two Harrys screwed you over is they wasn't gonna cut you in.
Fuck a duck.
Yeah, fuck a duck indeed. Just thought you'd like to know. Something for you to, what's the word? Contemplate before this goes to trial.
Thank you, Frank. I hope you get well.
You know, Nate, I believe you do.
Louis, I'll need my gun back.
Okay.
It's got sentimental value.
Give the man his gun back, Louis.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm Rob casting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is a momentous episode of Robservations. It is the last triple-digit episode. It is episode number 999. Quite frankly, I can't believe it. I say that all the time, but it's true. I can't believe I've done 900. Who does 999? Well, Joe Rogan. He's like in the thousands, 2000s. I'm no Joe Rogan. I should talk to more people. You never know. Have a bigger studio, multi-camera setup. Actually, I do have multi-cameras. I just haven't, you're going to see him soon, though. I'll tell you. I'm going to have a special guest in the studio. As you all know, Saturday is the 1000th episode of Robservations. And it's going to be about you imagination connoisseurs. This show exists for the audience. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have such a great audience, even though I've lost quite a few people since the election. I can understand that. I've been accused of a lot of things since the election. We're going to get into that later. Funny thing is I really haven't changed. It's very interesting that people think I have. I mean, you can watch this show. You can see. Have I changed? I don't know. Maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe I have changed and I just don't know it. And it takes you people to recognize changes in me. I certainly drink less on the show, but cocktail tonight. I know. People are like, why do you drink these old fashions? Well, because they're good. I like them. And these are on sale again. Always a score. But I haven't been drinking. I got to keep the face felt. But anyway, so for those of you who watch Let's Get Physical Media, you know that Ridley Scott's Gladiator 2 has opened in Europe to Ridley Scott's biggest opening in Europe in history. Almost $90 million, and I think it was 63 territories. Good on Mr. Scott. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about my relationship with Ridley Scott as a viewer, as an audience member, as somebody who very much admired him. Obviously, the first Ridley Scott movie I ever saw was Alien. In the same theater I saw Star Wars at, the UA 150 Theater on the corner of 6th and Blanchard in downtown Seattle, which they fucking blew up. My friend Craig Hyland took me there to show me. This is a theater I saw The Empire Strikes Back in 24 times. It's a movie theater. It was a twoplex. The big dome theater was the UA 150. Next to it was the UA 70. That's where I saw Dawn of the Dead for the first time, when it was theatrically released. Don't tell me about the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead. The original. Well, it's not the only. I actually like Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. I was reluctant to see it. I went in going, but I ended up liking it. Anyway, so I saw so many memorable movies at the UA 150. I saw 9 to 5 there. I saw all that jazz there. But I saw Star Wars there 13 times on original release. And across the street was the King Cinema, where Close Encounters was playing, where I also saw To Live and Die in L.A. But so nobody would take me to see Alien. And I coerced my sister and I, well, actually, it was just me, coerced my grandfather to go see it in 1979 when it opened. And I was scared shitless, but I didn't want to admit how scared I was. But I loved every minute of it. It was fantastic. So that was the first movie that I ever saw that Ridley Scott directed. And of course, the great thing about Alien, even today, peak verisimilitude. Everything about that movie is incredible. I mean, the creature design, the starship designs that were coming out of England, Star Wars and Alien. You'd never seen an oil refinery in space. You'd never seen anything that looked like the Nostromo, the commercial towing vehicle Nostromo. You'd never seen anything like it. And, from the opening, when Ridley Scott sets up the interior of the ship, so you really get a feeling. I mean, you look at it now, it's not dated except the 4x3 screens and the computer readouts, but they feel of a piece in that particular universe. And after I saw Alien, I went back and saw his first movie, The Duelists, that stars Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine, about these two men that keep getting in these duels. If you see the film, The Duelist is unbelievable, very much heavily influenced by the look of Barry Lyndon, but you can see here's a man that was a master at work. Now, I've never considered, of course, Alien 3 years later, in the summer of 1982, in June of 1982, I want to say it was June 17th, I'm not sure, but Blade Runner opened. And I went around the corner and up the street, and I saw Blade Runner at the Cinerama Theater. It wasn't a dome, but Seattle Cinerama. And they had a new bass. Warner Brothers had created some added bass, gimmicky. It wasn't gimmicky because it worked. It was great. And I went with my friend Jolie Von Sur and Mike Schertz, and she was the girl in our party. There was 3 of us, and it was rated R. And there was a possibility they wouldn't let us in. So, of course, we sent her across the street, and we're sitting there. And it was the noon show. It was the first show of Blade Runner. And, of course, I'm in the documentary about 1982, which just came out on disc. And by the way, if you've watched that documentary, it's a great documentary. It was 4 parts, but it's the theatrical version you can get on disc. And the same people that made that documentary have made another movie about the greatest Christmas movies ever made. And I'm in that as well. I don't know how much I'm in it, but I know I'm in it. And I think it airs on the CW on December 6th. So check that out. Greatest Christmas movies ever made. And me as a Jew, of course, Christmas movies are my forte. Actually, I loved Christmas when I was growing up. So maybe they are. I don't know. But it was very clear if you saw The Duelists, you saw Alien, and you saw Blade Runner, that Ridley Scott was an incredible visual stylist. I mean, everybody knows how amazing he is. And then, of course, subsequently, the movies that he made after Blade Runner, we saw Legend, of course, the Tom Cruise movie, which is basically, again, the Blade Runner of fantasy movies. It's still to this day Tim Curry's makeup, where he played Darkness, I think is the best prosthetic makeup characters. Well, and then you had Robert Picardo playing Meg Mucklebones, best prosthetic ever. And again, that was the first time, of course, we started to realize that Ridley Scott would make movies for the studio, and then he would make the versions of Legend that exist in America and exist in the rest of the world are totally different. I think that the American version of Legend is, of course, less than 90 minutes, and it has a Tangerine Dream score. The European version of Legend is close to 2 hours and has a Jerry Goldsmith score. And I remember at the time it was really hip. You had to find that. I remember getting the Goldsmith. I had the Tangerine Dream score on MCA vinyl. By the way, MCA vinyl was garbage in the 80s. Terrible. It sounded terrible. All kinds of skips and pops. The worst, cheapest ass vinyl. I hated that MCA. And I would buy lots of soundtracks on MCA, like the Jaws soundtracks. I'm like, why are these so shitty? I don't know. Why is your vinyl terrible? The vinyl for Tangerine Dream's score for Legend was terrible. Luckily, I was able to finally get it. It finally came out on CD. That was another thing. You had to wait sometimes for these albums to come out on CD in the 80s. It sucked. And then I got the Goldsmith score from Japan, and back then I paid like $60 for it. I mean, this is for a CD. But we were all fanatical back then, so it didn't matter. But anyway, how could you not be a Ridley Scott fan? Because he was such an incredible visual stylist. Even when he made movies like White Squall, which is about sailing. That's not what I wanted to see Ridley Scott do, but I would watch it. He made, Someone to Watch Over Me with Mimi Rogers and Tom Berenger. Even that movie was beautiful. So Ridley Scott was always an incredible stylist. And of course, Blade Runner and Alien loomed large in his career. But I was just a Ridley Scott fan. Even if something wasn't great, I would watch White Squall just because it looked, the way he shot it made it eminently watchable. And is that the right word? And then I would really love watching Someone to Watch Over Me. Maybe not the greatest movie in the world, and you'd seen better thrillers, romantic thrillers, surely, but it looked incredible, And then, of course, he made a movie that I don't think gets nearly enough love. In 89, I'd moved to California, and it was the first Ridley Scott movie I saw when I moved here in 88. Maybe it was 88 that it came out. I thought it was 89 at the National Theater, which was the theater that you see in the movie Zodiac, David Fincher's Zodiac. The National Theater in Westwood was incredible. It was basically kind of owned by Paramount, really. All the big Paramount movies would open there. And although I saw The Exorcist there at midnight once, which was awesome, and I saw an old girlfriend there, a girl named Carrie Borman. She was sexy, and she wore poison or perfume, very intoxicating. I don't know why I mentioned that, but I didn't go up and see her. I didn't say hello. Didn't want to, open old wounds. But anyway, I saw Black Rain in the National, and man, I loved it. I love Black Rain. I loved Hans Zimmer's score. I loved Michael Douglas's Crazy Perm. I loved, Andy Garcia going, talking shoes. Women of the 80s are looking at shoes. It's the second place they're looking. I always thought that was great. But again, the visual style, they didn't shoot much of that movie in Japan. Most of it was shot in downtown LA, but loved it anyway. So I've always loved Ridley Scott movies, even if they're not good. I like watching them. And I think over the last 10 years, I want to go over the last 10 years of output. Actually, let's go back to 2000. Let's go back to Gladiator, when Gladiator came out in 2000. Of course, it won Best Picture. He did not win Best Director at the Oscars, even though it did win Best Picture. And he was on a 3-year hiatus. The movie he made before Gladiator was G.I. Jane in 1997. So after he made Gladiator, the next year he had Hannibal come out and Black Hawk Down. Hannibal and Black Hawk Down. Now, I really liked Hannibal. I love the way it looked. I know people are like, well, it's no Silence of the Lambs, but neither was the book. The book was incredibly operatic. Mason Verger being played by Gary Oldman. I love the Giancarlo Giannini, who later went on to be in the James Bond films, who was an old school Italian actor, did many great roles. I loved Hannibal and I love Black Hawk Down. Both of those are bangers. And he made those, they both came out in 2001. And then after that, he did Matchstick Men, another film that I really enjoy that's totally underrated. And then after that, he did Kingdom of Heaven, which is one of the most egregious examples of Ridley Scott's versions, where he always has extended versions of his movies. The theatrical version is, I'm not going to call it garbage because every frame is beautiful. But if you haven't seen the extended version of Kingdom of Heaven, it is very much worth seeing. It literally is like a totally different movie. And then he made the Russell Crowe wine movie, where Russell Crowe just gets drunk, and they went to Italy. A Good Year. Good Year's not a great movie. Love watching it. Looks incredible. I'm like, I want to be that guy. I want to be them. I want to hang out. It's kind of like when Joe Esterhaus wrote Showgirls and Paul Verhoeven directed it, and they had a studio go pay for them to go live in Las Vegas and make a movie about strippers. Come on. Ridley Scott did the same thing with wine and like Italy. What's not to love? Everything. Nothing. And then after that, with Denzel, American Gangster with Russell Crowe again. Banger. And then he made Body of Lies, the movie that, Meg Ryan, poor little Meg Ryan, fell in love with Russell Crowe and ruined her marriage with Dennis Quaid. Oh, well, or was that Proof of Life? I think that was. So it wasn't Body of Lies. I'm wrong. It was Proof of Life. But anyway, Body of Lies was pretty good too. Nah, I'm just kidding. I knew it was Proof of Life. And then after that, Robin Hood, Prometheus. Prometheus, one of the best looking science fiction movies ever made, but pretty dunderheaded. Although I did download a recent version of it where they used all the shorts and they used all the deleted scenes and made a movie that's a little bit more interesting and more palatable. But then he made the movie I like the best, other than one other movie, The Counselor. People don't love The Counselor. I don't know why. Because The Counselor delivers, it's exactly what it was supposed to be, and it was written, it's the only screenplay written by Cormac McCarthy. Unbelievable. I love The Counselor. The Counselor is one evil movie. It's anti-human. I love it for that reason. And then, of course, he did some other things too, but incredible movie. So you gotta love The Counselor, or you don't have to love The Counselor. I can love The Counselor. I just lost my place where I was. So after The Counselor. Of course, Exodus, Gods and Kings. And then, of course, 2015, he made one of the best. It stands right alongside Alien and Blade Runner. Different kind of a movie. Is one of the greatest science fiction movies ever made, The Martian, based on Andy Weir's book. Again, there's a theatrical cut and an extended cut. I prefer the extended cut. If you guys like that movie and you like that book, you should be very looking forward to a movie that's coming out this year that's based on Andy Weir's third novel, Project Hail Mary, that stars Ryan Gosling, and Rocky, which I anticipate is going to be the most beloved alien on screen since E.T. But if you haven't read the book, you should. It's a one-sitting book. You'll read it in one sitting. Then, of course, he made Alien Covenant, All the Money in the World, Raised by Wolves. He directed 2 episodes, The Last Duel, House of Gucci, Napoleon. So his output hasn't been so great since The Martian, but every Ridley Scott movie to me is worth, even if you don't like Napoleon, not a big fan of that, or the extended version, turn off the sound and get some great techno music or electro, or get some, whatever your favorite electronica is, or better yet, go play Napoleon with the soundtrack to either Vangelis' soundtrack for 1492 or Blade Runner, or better yet, both. Program him and just watch Napoleon with Vangelis music, and it works. Poor Vangelis, rest in peace. It's not Vangelis, by the way. It's Vangelis. I mispronounced his name for years. But now we come to, which opened last week, Gladiator 2. Some people are going to say, oh, is it like, Prometheus or Alien Covenant? Is it a sequel like that? Did Gladiator 2 need to get made? Of course not. Of course, everyone has heard that Nick Cave, as in Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Nick Cave, the Proposition Nick Cave, wrote a Gladiator 2 script where Maximus in the afterlife goes to the gods of Olympus, and the gods of Olympus give him life again. That's what Nick Cave's script was about, which could have been interesting with a Ridley Scott spin. Add some the gods of Olympus, and why shouldn't Maximus get resurrected? I guess it would be the Roman pantheon as opposed to the Greek pantheon. The Roman gods, breathed life back into Maximus. Although I can see that the supernatural element of that might not have worked. And what would happen? I mean, didn't Gladiator have a happy ending? So now we're at Gladiator 2. It's 16 years later, and I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'll just say I really liked Gladiator 2. Is it Gladiator 1? No. I love Gladiator 1. I can probably recite it chapter and verse. But the thing about Gladiator 1 is it's incredibly focused on Maximus. And look, and the relationships that Maximus has with both Marcus Aurelius, Richard Harris's Marcus Aurelius, and then, of course, Oliver Reed. Of course, his life was cut short, and they still made the movie work. And then of course Jaimin Hansu and the other gladiators in the arena. It's a movie that has a singular focus. It's a revenge film. You are shown how Maximus is great during the Battle of Germania. He has the respect of his men. He gets double crossed by a petulant little worm of a son, Marcus Aurelius' son, who expects him to make Commodus. He thinks he deserves to be emperor, and Marcus Aurelius says no. He says to Maximus, "You, Maximus, you need to lead Rome when I die, when I'm not here anymore. Do you accept this?" And Maximus reluctantly agrees, and then, of course, the emperor is slain. We all know the story, wins Best Picture. Love the movie. Gladiator 2 is not like that. I'll flat out say it's not as focused. It doesn't provide the necessarily the visceral thrills of the first Gladiator. How could it? But Gladiator 2 I did find entertaining. Gladiator 2 is a movie, and coming up this weekend, on Friday actually, you can watch my interview with Gladiator and Gladiator 2 director of photography John Matheson, costume designer Janty Yates, and also military costume designer David Crossman, who did all of the armor in the movie, of which there is a lot. The thing that I really liked, and that they told me in the interview, is that Gladiator 2 is all about excess. It's all about bread and circuses, the ridiculousness, everything is heightened, it's all over the top, and it really is showing you the decline of the Roman Empire. It's all about a civilization that has lost its way. And I think it's very apparent in the movie. And there's going to be a lot of people that say that Paul Mescal, I want to say Mescal. Paul Mescal he's not Russell Crowe. And Pedro Pascal, what I thought was really interesting is Pedro Pascal is basically playing the Maximus role if Maximus was able to take Marcus Aurelius up on his offer and go to Rome and sort of provide an example of how to lead Rome. But there's these two crazy emperors, these two young emperors who are both dying of syphilis, and they represent, I mean, they're very Caligula-esque, but as Ridley Scott called them, they're basically the Johnny Rottens of Rome, and everything is excessive. You don't see how they got to power, and a lot of people will criticize the movie and say, well, how come at the end of Gladiator it's not like it's fictional. If you read the history of Rome, look, there's not a lot of fictional reality in this movie, which is fine. This is a fever dream that is Rome. It's not a whisper. Rome is but a whisper. It's not that. And if you look at it that way, and it's really interesting how Gladiator 2 mirrors Gladiator 1. Gladiator 2 opens with a battle, but we're on the other side of it. We see a walled city, and we meet Lucius, who is the son of Lucilla, who Connie Nielsen plays and comes back. And for people that want to know, is Claudius, is Gracchus, is Derek Jacobi in Gladiator 2? Yes. His part is very small. Though, like any Ridley Scott movie, I hope it's an hour longer on disc. I hope they put out an extended version. I don't know if they will. They should. But I really enjoyed Gladiator 2. And not every movie, I don't understand how come every single moviegoer now, especially in the fan space, if movies aren't all 100% awesome, it's like they either have to be 100% or nothing. Well, I've gone throughout my life watching all kinds of movies, and I kind of accept them at the scale they're presented to me at. I know that Gladiator 2 is not near, it's not going to be, look, how many Top Gun Mavericks or Godfather 2s or The Road Warriors or Empire Strikes Back exists in the world? Not many. But there are sequels that aren't nearly as good as the originals that I love. Jaws 2. Jaws 2 is no Jaws, but I like Jaws 2. 2010 is no 2001, but it's a good space adventure that I enjoy. Gladiator 2 follows in those footsteps. I have called it already the Top Gun Maverick of Gladiator movies. It's certainly not that. I'll say it is, but it really isn't. But I liked Gladiator 2. I enjoyed Gladiator 2. I was totally entertained. It has a great ending. I really enjoyed being immersed in that world. I wish there was more of it. I wish that there was more detail. Look, Yes, they did fill the Colosseum with water. Were there sharks in that Colosseum? No. Are there sharks in the Colosseum in Gladiator 2? Yes. Is that ridiculous? Of course it is. Just like the CG monkeys are ridiculous. But I don't care. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at the films, at the picture shows. And I don't think anybody should have to apologize for liking it. A lot of people have liked Gladiator 2 because it's a movie that is reveling in its excess. And I don't expect, I would say that Gladiator 2, like a lot of movies, are glorified B films. And when I say B movies, like when I went and saw the John Carpenter penned Black Moon Rising with Tommy Lee Jones, and no one talks about the cool futuristic car in Black Moon Rising. Did I expect it to be, tremendous? No, I liked it. The movie The Wraith with Charlie Sheen and Sherilyn Fenn. Hubba hubba. Is that a great movie? No, but I liked it. Do I like Night of the Comet? I do. Is Night of the Comet great? No. But for what it is, it delivered the goods. Maybe one of my favorite films that I would consider a B movie, Paul Bartel's Death Race 2000. If you've never seen the original Death Race 2000, it probably will come off as being campy and silly and ridiculous, but not when I was a kid, and not during the early days of home video. When, thank you, Warner Brothers, they released Death Race 2000 and we watched it 100 times. I can enjoy it on that level. Gladiator, it's better than those movies because Ridley Scott shot it. People are always complaining about even the look of it, but John Matheson, the cinematographer, will tell you it was supposed to look not quite like Fellini's Satyricon, but, along those lines. So anyway, I did find an interesting article, an interesting review that I wanted to share with you. I've shared it already on my social media accounts, and if you read it, well, you can check out and go have a drink, and I'll have a drink with you before I read it. But I thought it was really interesting because it speaks to where America is at right now, and I kind of think it speaks to the world at large. So I thought this was a very insightful review, so I would like to read it. And it's by Eris Rusnios, I'll probably, from Unheard. I don't know if I've ever read anything from this before, but hey, somebody's probably going to say it's some weird far-right website. Why are you looking at these things, Rob? I try and explain to people, I look at everything. I'll talk to anybody, I'll look at anything. Because you can learn something from anybody, even if you are diametrically opposed to what they believe. Understand what they believe so then you can argue against them. I don't know. Maybe this isn't that. I don't think it is. I like this article. I'm going to read it unapologetically. Is Ridley Scott a good filmmaker? It is surprisingly difficult to say, just as it is difficult to say, even after watching Gladiator 2, whether or not it is a good film. Yet the original Gladiator was a perfect film, in the same way a trashy 3-minute pop song can be perfect. A creation of the studio system working at full pace within the constraints of the genre. A product designed to appeal as many people as possible, nevertheless achieved a kind of immortality. The purest, almost platonic form of the Hollywood movie, as in the platonic as in Plato. The sequel, notwithstanding some spectacular violence, not so much. But the differences between the two films, despite their almost identical plot lines, highlight how the culture has changed in the intervening quarter century. A titan of industry rather than an auteur, the fascination with Ridley Scott is how he soaks up and radiates the wider energies of the culture around him. If Gladiator reinvented the sword and sandal epic at the precise moment of America's imperial zenith, 2001's Black Hawk Down, through the uncanny prescience of its timing, caught the mood of the global war on terror, which was both its result and downfall. His more or less explicit war on terror epic, Kingdom of Heaven, still has the power to frustrate and delight in equal measure, recasting the Crusades through the lens of boomer liberalism, soaking up the worldview of the then fashionable new atheism. By 2021's underwatched The Last Duel, Scott had steered his craft where was I? Scott had steered his craft toward the Me Too wave. The enthusiasms of the current zeitgeist enter the director's mind as raw material and are churned out, processed, and packaged as glossy spectacle. What does Gladiator 2 tell us about the zeitgeist of 2024? It is a surprisingly right-wing film. If the plot is laid out starkly, it could be a Mel Gibson script. A humble married farmer finds his homeland invaded. His wife is killed and he is dragged to the metropole of an overextended empire, now sunk into decadence. The Rome of Gladiator 2 is dirtier and more decrepit than that of Gladiator. Its population, wont to burn the city down in fiery but peaceful protests, is significantly more diverse. In the civic nationalism of the lost Roman dream wistfully expressed by an Indian gladiator turned healer, Scott explicitly makes his Rome modern America. Echoing Francis Fukuyama's The Last Man postscript to the end of history, Denzel Washington delivers an eccentric speech on Thymos in justifying his desire to bring the rotten edifice down. Rome must fall, he says. I need only give it a push. The villainous twin emperors, the source of the moral rot at the empire's heart, are effete, spoilt children. In Scott's portrayal, they are also explicitly, strikingly queer in the modern sense. The abruptness of the film's pivot from the reigning aesthetic and morality of the 2010s is genuinely startling. If the Rome of Gladiator was still the shining city on a hill, or Seven, which had merely lost its way through the chance rule of a bad emperor, the Rome of the sequel is inherently evil. Loosely immoral, at the center, and addicted to foreign wars without purpose. I know the chaos they have wrought, we are told of the Romans. This city is diseased. The director himself fears for the near future. The big good wolf, the U.S., used to go, don't do that. That's all gone, he said in an interview this week. I think there's something even worse down the line. Or, as he has a character lament, the dream of Rome is an old man's fantasy. There is no other Rome. Creating a mass-market blockbuster that is dark, pessimistic, and cynical of the society that produced it, unintentionally or not, Scott has captured the Trumpian zeitgeist swirling around him. Once again, his outsider must drain the swamp, this time for good. But even as he leaves the door open for another sequel, history constrains his choices. There is no return from the decadent empire to the virtuous republic. We already know how the story ends. I thought that was really interesting, a really interesting take on Gladiator 2. Now, the reason I thought that was interesting is because I've noticed something that has been happening to me personally. Over the last 2 weeks, I've lost a lot of subscribers on this channel. A lot of people have lost Twitter followers. They're going to Blue Sky. Why, I don't know. A lot of people might hate my guts because of my staunch support of Israel, which I understand. I get it. I'm right. History will prove me right. But there we go. I just lost 100 subscribers. But anyway, I'm perfectly willing to debate it. But what's interesting, too, is that the election went the way it went. It's done. So the real question is, now, what can we do to all work towards building a better America, if America needs to be made better? And I find it interesting that my philosophy, as is the philosophy of this channel, as we approach this weekend for the 1000th episode, which I have thrown open the doors for anybody, as I am wont to do, to come talk to me. And meaning, by definition, talk to you. And I've had a lot of people take me up on that. And this channel exists to do two things. One, share our enthusiasm of pop culture, actually of the power of storytelling, and how storytelling across its many forms can serve to unite us. Great stories, after all, regardless of what they're about, are really about the human experience. And there's no better way to explain the great human truths or human experience than through the great stories. And what I loved about motion pictures, what I will always love about motion pictures, despite the fact that their importance has been diminished in our society over the last 20 years, is that motion pictures were sort of the great, think about it. You have a room full of seats, sometimes in the bigger theaters, 1,000 people from all walks of life, every shape, size, color, and creed. You know what? Maybe some people it's different. I have never once, ever, thought about who I'm sitting next to in a movie theater. Don't care if we believe the same things. Don't care if we're the same sexuality, the same color, the same religious preference. I don't give a fuck. All I know is when I sit next to somebody in a theater, they were interested in the same story that I was, which means that's the great equalizer. We're all there to see the same thing. And when the lights go down, let's assume we all shut the fuck up and you're not a rude motherfucker that turns your phone on or thinks that anything that's going to happen in your phone, which is one of the problems with our society now, people think that they're more important than the actual thing they came to see. Fuck that. Maybe that's because of unschooling. Regardless, those are stupid people who are uneducated and dumb, and they're the problem. So just so you know, when you turn on, like I like to do this, if somebody's sitting close to me, or they're talking or they're yammering away during a movie, pull that Clint Eastwood and go, if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm going to take my pocket knife out and I'm going to slit your throat ear to ear. It works. Sometimes. Maybe don't do that. I've only actually done it once and it did work. I did do it actually. But, I don't know if that was my best Clint Eastwood voice. But that's the thing. It used to be different. Now everyone thinks they're, in their homes, and everybody thinks that their, main character syndrome means that whatever they do is the most important thing. But for the most part, that was going into a movie theater was the great equalizer. The story was the important thing. And when everybody got together, and you wanted it to be collective. You wanted that experience. And now my whole thing is, it doesn't matter whether, look, I consider myself, as I've said, a classical liberal with left leanings, and I've been a registered Democrat all my life. Just because the election might not have gone my way, the election went the way it went. Resounding victory, House, Senate, the executive branch, everything. So why not, rather than bitch and moan and complain, what can I do in the next 4 years through the Trump presidency to do what I can? My part is doing what I've always done. Conversation. Making sure that everyone knows you are welcome here. I'm not going to sit there and quit Twitter. I'm not going to sit there and run away to a different country. I'm here to talk to everybody. Do you know why? Because it doesn't matter what your religious preference is, your political preferences, your sexualities. You love storytelling. And that's our common ground. That's where I meet you. I'm not gonna pillory you unless you like modern Star Trek. That's my demarcation point. I'm kidding. If you love modern Star Trek, there's gonna be a lot of people that their first experience with Star Trek was modern Star Trek, and if they like modern Star Trek, I'm the last person that's gonna say to them, people are like, "Hey, Rob, you're always gatekeeping." No, I'm not gatekeeping. I have an opinion. If my opinion differs from yours, that doesn't mean I'm gatekeeping. What I expect you to do is step up to the plate and tell me why you like something. I can tell you why I don't like something, but you better be able to tell me why you like something. Don't just back down. You're a mean old man. You're shouting at clowns. Fuck off. Tell me why you like something. Don't just yell at me, and when I complain about something, you come at me with the old man shouting at clouds. We all need to understand what we believe and why we believe it. That's what's important. So you can go and have cogent, meaningful debate with people who disagree with you and be able to look them in the eyes. Look them in the eyes. Especially if you're out protesting against, say, what a foreign government is doing that you disagree with because you're a useful idiot. If you can't stand up next to somebody who comes from an opposing force and look them in the eye, you're full of shit. You should get off the world stage because you have nothing to offer anyone. Gladiator 2 is a movie that will make you think. And if you think about it in terms of where America is at, you have to ask yourself, what can we do? John F. Kennedy once said, Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And if there's a time, say right now, that you don't agree with what happened at the election, but a lot of people did. Donald Trump won the popular vote by millions of votes. If you don't like what's happening, ask yourself, rather than bitch and moan and complain and crawl in a hole for 4 years, how can you get up and do something? For me, I'm here on YouTube and I'm trying to make great entertainment that espouses what I believe is important. Great storytelling. I think True Noir is great storytelling. I began with a great book that Max Allan Collins wrote about early 1930s America. It's set in 1932 and 1933. I think I've done everything I can to make some great entertainment that you guys are going to love. That comes from my heart in terms of what I believe, and it's about a man. It's about the coming of age story of a man who thought he knew what was true about the world, and he realized he didn't know much. And he didn't realize how deep the darkness and the corruption went. But in doing so, he resolves himself to fight this throughout his life. And that's what the other 18 books are about. So the real question is, when you watch a movie like Gladiator 2, are you going to sit there and go, it sucked? Or are you going to stop for a minute and think about it? Think about, hey, it might not be Gladiator. That's fine. But you take it on its own terms. What does it mean to you? If anything, what did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? And if you just say it sucked, okay, but why did it suck? What was it that you didn't like about it? Can you articulate it? And if we're going to have a conversation, if you're going to come on this show live, I don't know how many people are going to watch, but if you're going to say something, you have a platform. I mean, not as big of a platform as, say, the Critical Drinker or Russell Brand, like I showed at the beginning of this show. But given a choice and you can speak to people, what are you going to say? I mean, I think the real important thing is that America has had all kinds of politicians throughout the years. I mean, remember, do I think that America is going to have another civil war? I do not. I do not. I believe in Americans because I've seen it with my own eyes that, you know what? Most Americans, when you stand in front of somebody and you're actually going to break bread, you're going into a bar, you have a beer. Sure, there's a lot of acrimony these days. But for the most part, my experience has been most people, if you get them in a conversation, you sit down, you break bread with people, you might be, your own family, you can get, Thanksgiving is coming. I'm sure next week there's going to be huge, my God, civil wars at the dinner table, the likes of which I can't even begin to imagine. But I honestly believe that one of the great things about Americans is we're able to overcome those differences and sit down and be like, okay, let's get, what do we need to get done right now? Let's put our differences aside. Are we gonna go Amish style and witness? Are we gonna raise a barn? Are we gonna do that? Let's raise the barn first, and then we can yell and scream at each other after the task is done. I think Americans are good at that. And I think what's really interesting, the real question is, we have to ask ourselves, why is there a divide in this country? And when you're sitting in a movie like Gladiator 2, I think one of the really interesting things about a movie like that is when you're watching it, think about what's going on there. How does it relate to your own life? Great stories, even though they're about ancient Rome. As we all know, men think about ancient Rome all the time, probably more than sex. Some people. I mean, not me. I think about it a lot. But, other things I think about too, like breasts. But anyway, it's a real question. So what are we going to do? For the next 4 years, why don't we do things to make the country better? And you know what? I mean, a lot of people, look, the Republicans are in control. I don't think that all Republicans are evil. I think there's a lot of statesmen that are going to have to step up within the Republican Party and make tough decisions, because we're in a position where they now have the power. Are they going to wield it in a way that's going to be, they want to protect legacy, and I do think that for the most part, I'm an optimist and I want to see people step up and do amazing things. At first, everyone's going to talk about how horrible everything is because they're looking at it from their own perspective. I'm only thinking about it from my perspective. And, the thing that I want or the thing that I believe in, they're going to destroy that, whatever it is. Don't think about yourself. Think about the Republic. Or as communists said, Republic, Republic, Republic. Yes. Democracy is not going to die with thunderous applause. Those are cautionary tales. America is still the greatest country in the world. That's why people want to come over here. Are we deeply flawed? Yeah. But you know what? I like to think that we can get better. And I'll tell you something. what was happening? Not all of it was working. So maybe a change of direction. And you know what? If enough people get pissed off at the change of direction, it'll change again. That's what living in a republic is. And I think Gladiator 2, when you go see it, will make you think about what does it mean to live in the... I mean, it's an empire, it's a republic, there's a Senate, there's not a Senate. Maybe seeing Gladiator 2 will make you interested in civics. That'd be a good thing. I think a lot of us could use more civics in our life, and sex too. But, it's all part of the same thing. And if a great story can make you crack open a book or do a Google search on a certain thing, like what is the difference between a republic and a democracy? What is that difference? A democracy, of course, is really majority rules. Whoever votes the most. A republic, there's much more to it than just that. It's not just the popular vote. There's more things like a constitution. And there's things that control those things. So democracies are great, but we're a republic. And we have checks and balances and different things. And so, anyway, when you go see Gladiator 2, ask yourself, what can we do to make America the kind of country we all want to live in? Because I think we can all contribute all the time. And even if it's only doing a YouTube channel where you ask everybody to come in, let's talk about storytelling. What does it mean to you? And how do the stories that we consume affect our real lives? That's the key. And what do they inspire us to do or want to do? Anyway, that's my take on Gladiator 2. I liked it. I thought it was thought-provoking. I enjoyed it. I thought it was over the top and ridiculous, but that was kind of the point. But you know what? I was totally satisfied. And there's a big speech at the end, and I think if you're not satisfied by the big speech at the end, perhaps it's not that we don't, look, you're still welcome here. Do I think it's like Gladiator 1? No. But I do think it has value. And I think it's worth seeing. And I hope everybody goes out to see it. And you might hate it. And if you hate it, come back here and tell me why. Love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear your thoughts. As always, I love to hear your thoughts, even if they're diametrically opposed from mine. Yes, even about Star Trek Discovery. Although the people that like Star Trek Discovery can't really articulate to my satisfaction why. But we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, today, 30 years ago, November 18th, 1994, I know exactly where I was. You know where I was? I was on the Paramount lot, and they had a brand new theater built on the Paramount lot, a standalone. Normally you'd go to, I want to say Screening Room 5, but that's Warner Brothers. You'd walk up these stairs, and I saw a test screening of Star Trek 6. Paramount finally built this unbelievable standalone theater. And I was invited to go see Generations. And I just met my friend Mark Altman, Inglorious Trexperts. Mark Altman, we'd become friends. Now, we had met in August at the San Diego Comic-Con. So I'd only known him August, September, October, November, a couple months, and we went together. And the funniest thing I think I've ever seen, reaction I've ever seen ever in my life, was Mark Altman seething. I mean, let's face it. He and we later made a movie with William Shatner, Free Enterprise. Maybe someday you'll get to see it in the way it's supposed to be seen. It's kind of a forgotten film, but we're proud of it. We walked out of that movie. We both were seething in anger. I hated it. I hated what they did to Kirk. I hated the limited scope. I hated the movie. And I was a huge Next Generation fan, and coming off the triumph of All Good Things that had happened just in the previous June, June, it had been 6 months, and then we were served up the swill that was Generations. And it's a movie that starts, the first shot is a fucking bottle going through space, a bottle of Dom Perignon. And it's going through space and crashes against the Enterprise B hull, christening the Enterprise B. I mean, a movie that begins with booze in space, that should be right up my alley. I hated Generations. Now, to understand a little bit, I won't get into why I hated it so much. Mostly it's because of how Kirk was treated and the ridiculousness of all of it. None of it made a lick of sense. Hated it. Hated it. And after All Good Things, which is so good, and we won't get it, you can read that All Good Things should have been the movie and whatever. Don't care. if you go back and you look at Red Letter Media and Mr. Plinkett's, the very first thing I ever saw of Red Letter Media was their review of Generations. This movie is worse than, that was the first thing, that's when I fell in love with everybody over at Red Letter Media. I love that review. Their review of the 4 Next Generation movies the review of the prequels upped the ante, but when I saw the Generations review, I'm like, yes, everything you say is correct. I know it's, now you watch it's a little arch. But anyway, I just felt that it was a film that it felt like it was a cut and paste job. It had all this stuff that doesn't make any sense. I mean, they literally fire an Estes model rocket at one point. I built model rockets bigger than the Estes model rocket they fire in Generations. They fire it, and it's supposed to have reached the sun in seconds. It takes light, 186,000 miles. Light traveling at 186,000 miles per second. Now, the circumference of the Earth is only 27,000 miles all the way around. I think at the equator. I think it's 27,000 miles around. So light travels 186,000 miles per second. That means light could go around this planet, do the math, 6 times in 1 second. So it takes light 8 minutes to come from our sun to our sky. In Generations, they fire a missile, a chemical rocket, not a warp-powered torpedo, not a photon torpedo, but a chemical rocket that literally takes like seconds to go from the surface of Viridian 3 to the sun. I was out, man. My suspension of disbelief through that movie, I couldn't handle it. I can't. It was a collection of stupid. I mean, in it, as you all know, there's the Nexus. Like somehow, this spacefaring energy ribbon. Where does that come from? Don't know. But apparently, if it passes over you, it knows it can read your mind. Like this is some super intelligence that reads your mind and then gives you is able to provide. It was so. The ask was too big. As everyone knows, all fantasy films, science fiction, fantasy, and horror have one big ask. The big ask in Generations is that you believe the Nexus exists, that there is some fucking spacefaring ribbon that is traveling through the cosmos that can read your mind and then provide you. Not only does it read your mind, it digs deep and it gives you the fantasy that you like most want, and then it somehow is able to create illusions that you can live in. A spacefaring energy ribbon. That I don't buy it. I do not accept that as and I know a lot of people don't care. They're like, well, Rob, why do you even care about this stuff? Look, if you want to give, like, I can believe a super intelligent alien species the Telosians, Star Trek illusions in the cage, the rejected pilot for Star Trek, the Telosians can create illusions. They can basically read your mind and give you the Matrix, and you can live where you want. You can have your horse tango. You can have a club where you have green animal women or Orion slave girls, depending on what, if you're politically correct or whatever, dancing for you. You can do whatever you want. I get that. I understand that. But I don't believe that a spacefaring energy ribbon can do the same things that the Telosians could do to you, because where's the intelligence? There's got to be an intelligence that's able to read your mind and make decisions. But this super intelligent energy ribbon, those two things, these are not chocolate and peanut butter. I did not buy that shit. I couldn't watch it. And then, of course, as everything they said in the Plinkett review, look, it was nice seeing Scotty and Chekhov come in with Kirk, but come on. Leonard Nimoy wasn't given anything to do, so he didn't want to be in the movie. And then Kirk winds up in the ribbon, and then his Kirk's fantasy is to be living in the mountains with, his dog Butler and some woman named Antonia we've never heard before. What the hell's that? Why isn't he living back in 30s New York with Edith Keeler, who never got hit? I don't know. Who knows? Doesn't matter. Don't like that movie. But it's 30 years old. And a lot of people do. By the way, a Christmas movie, certainly. But let's read about it. I found one little article that I wanted to read to you guys, as you know that I would do. Although I will say this, Generations does have one of the great lines of any movie of all, and you know what it is. You know what I'm going to say. It's Soren, Malcolm McDowell's character. By the way, Soren was a character's name from, of course, another great episode of Next Generation called The Outcast. And I was mixed up with that. But anyway, what is the line that Malcolm McDowell says? Say it with me now. Time is the fire in which we burn. That's a great line. Time is a predator. I love that. That line is so good. And if for no other reason, maybe Generations can exist just for that line. And there's cool stuff in it. Like I like in the holodeck when they're on the HMS Enterprise and, Worf knocks Beverly Crusher into the drink. Although, you're kind of like, or no, it's Data who does that. And that's kind of dumb. Like, I understand he's just learning how to come to grips with all that, but hey, what are you going to do? So anyway, here's the article I found. I just found it, thought it was interesting. A fire in which we burn. This is from therealbits.com. I don't think I've ever read anything from this website. It was written by Richard Gray, and he wrote it today. I remember when Star Trek Generations hit cinemas. I bought everything. The book, posters, collectible cards, the lot. The film came out just a few years after the franchise's 25th anniversary, right at the height of my fandom. That younger self would have rated it 5 stars easily, maybe even 6. But as the years have passed, my fandom has persisted while my critical lens has sharpened, or arguably grown more cynical. Having rewatched The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise fairly recently, it's easier to see the spectrum of what Trek can offer. And Generations is good Trek, though the series has shown us it can be great. I don't even think Generations is good Trek. The film's plot centers around the mysterious Nexus, a moving space-time rift. It was believed to have killed Captain Kirk aboard the Enterprise B in 2293 while rescuing refugees from its deadly pull. Yet almost 8 decades later, the Enterprise D discovers that the Nexus offers those who enter it a surreal paradise where their deepest desires are eternally realized, untouched by the outside world. As refugee Tolian Soren relentlessly seeks to return to the Nexus, Jean-Luc Picard and Captain Kirk's paths cross, and 2 legends must face both personal and universal stakes to save the galaxy. A friend recently called Generations underrated, and I have to agree. For all its flaws, it's the best of the odd-numbered Trek films by a long shot, and truly feels like TNG expanded, visually, emotionally, and logistically. The sets are stunning, and the meticulously detailed and cinematography finally places TNG on a larger-than-life scale. I will grant it that. It has beautiful, beautiful cinematography. A prime example is the return of the TNG crew, who had wrapped their final seasons on television only 6 months prior. Beginning with Worf's promotion in a holodeck simulation of an old sailing ship, the film's $35 million budget is immediately on display. This scale continues through the thrilling space battle with the Klingon bird of prey, the massive energy phenomenon of the Nexus, and ultimately the Enterprise's saucer crash landing onto a planet's surface. Whatever. However, in its attempt to appeal to a broader audience, the film stumbles in places. Like the Nexus itself, Generations surrounds us with comforting things, familiar faces, Klingons, space battles, a holodeck sequence, and Data's iconic, "Oh shit!" Yeah, all of that sounds like great Star Trek to me. But the essence of Trek feels just out of reach. As striking as Data's moment was, and tame now thanks to Discovery and Picard, some of the humor feels forced. No. Almost poking fun at the characters rather than celebrating them. Really? Data's emotional subplot, while memorable, feels tacked on and undermining the nuance of his 7-season journey. Yep. Picard, on the other hand, gets to explore his own emotional development. The concept of family repeatedly arises throughout the series, as does the notion of what-ifs. First of all, yeah, his nephew and Samantha Agar die, but we already dealt with this in Family. So often, the Next Generation movies return to themes that were covered in a much better way on the series itself. I mean, I know everyone loves First Contact. It's fine. But it's covering ground that was way better. Way better? That's terrible grammar. That was already covered on the show. Between what went on with Q-Who, Best of Both Worlds, Iborg. Well, let's leave it at that. And Family. Not Descent 1 and 2. Less said the better. But I would say that Q-Who, Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2, and Iborg, Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2 are kind of one story, and even the second part of that, part 2 is... But those 3-4 episodes were really all you needed to know about the Borg. Of course, then they were done to death on Voyager. And when you get to First Contact, I appreciate what Jonathan Frakes did to it. But my God, that's another movie that's just goofy as hell. And they had to add a Borg queen, which makes no sense based on what we saw in Q Who, which is a truly scary depiction of the Borg. Same with Best of Both Worlds. Picard, on the other hand, gets to explore his own emotional development. The concept of family repeatedly arises throughout the series, as does the notion of what-ifs. Much like the sublime Hugo Award-winning Season 5 episode, The Inner Light, Picard sees what his life would be like if he had a family and children, which we've already seen. We saw that in The Inner Light, and we also saw The Road Less Traveled in Tapestry. Both of those episodes, 45 minutes each, do a better job examining those issues than this movie does. Picard sees what life would be like if he had a family and children. His emotional journey is partially fueled by the recent loss of his brother Robert and young nephew Rene in a fire, leaving him as the last of the Picards. And, of course, there's the long-awaited meeting between Kirk and Picard. The Nexus presents this as a meeting of two explorers at different stages in their careers, both contemplating life's regrets. Let me tell you something. That's not fucking James Kirk, and it's not Jean-Luc Picard. They're not contemplating life's regrets. This is the problem. What they tried to do, and maybe what they did, and what Patrick Stewart did in Picard, the series, is they put too much of themselves. There's too much William Shatner in Generations, and there's too much Jean-Luc Picard. There's too much Patrick Stewart in Generations as well. These are not the stories of these two fictional space explorers meeting. These are the stories of what actors William Shatner and Patrick Stewart wanted. So it doesn't really work. It's not exciting. You know, it's the regrets that Picard might have would not be, he wanted to be an archaeologist. And I don't think Kirk ever had regrets. He didn't want to be something he wasn't. He was exactly who he wanted to be. The regret he had that we already saw in Star Trek The Motion Picture was he took a desk job. As McCoy said in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, get back your command. Get it back before you turn into part of this collection. Before you really do grow old. We already covered this ground. It was already covered beautifully in other episodes and other movies that came before this one. The scenes feel more like a horseback compromise between eras than an organic meeting. In hindsight, it would have only taken a few more scenes to develop Kirk's journey further, instead of the retrospectively cheap shot of killing off a legend. In fact, I still found the journey between Data and his cat Spot more emotional. Nevertheless, the Nexus as a means of examining life choices, morality, and legacy is precisely what Star Trek and certainly TNG is all about. Think about the 6th season episode Tapestry, where the immortal being Q allows Picard to revisit a pivotal moment in his life and watch the ripple effects in that episode. Picard declares he would rather die as a captain than live life of safety and mediocrity. Here, the Nexus offers a similar opportunity for characters to reconsider their paths, but its exploration feels somewhat underdeveloped in the film's broader context. TNG's potential on the big screen came into full focus just a few years later with First Contact, arguably the finest of the TNG films. Yes, but that's not saying much. And then with Insurrection, which feels like a feature-length episode in the best sense. I like Insurrection. It might be my favorite controversial choice because it's also deeply compromised if you read Michael Pillar's book on the writing of Insurrection, which could have been a much different movie. Too bad it didn't happen. Which feels like a feature-length episode in the best sense. Nemesis, of course, did its own thing, but there's still something about Generations that resonates with me. Even now, part of me is still that teenager seeing it for the first time in the cinema, wide-eyed at the scale and familiar faces, and he wouldn't care about these quibbles. He's just thrilled to be along for the ride. Well, that's good for you. I was never that teenager. Neither was Mark A. Altman. Coming out of that theater, I had to restrain him. We're on the Paramount lot, and he was about to explode. His face was red. His fro was sticking up. You know, he was ready to explode. I'm telling you he was. I had to calm him down like, dude, we got to get out of here. We're on the Paramount lot. I think I avoided some kind of an international incident. I mean, Melrose Avenue would never have been the same. We wouldn't have even got through the gate. It was kind of like a phaser on overload. You have to like get it out of the ship when you find it in the red alert. When you see it in the red alert thing, you gotta get it out before it explodes. That was what Mark was like. I felt that way, but I was a little bit more contained. The thing about Generations is, I'd already read a Star Trek novel called Federation that was written by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens. Now, they knew the 30th anniversary of Star Trek was coming up, so they wrote one of the greatest Star Trek novels ever written, which is Federation, which was about what? Kirk and Picard meeting. And it is an incredible science fiction story. And if you really and the problem was I'd already read the book before I saw Generations, the movie, I think. And that's the problem that was in my head, which is the problem with a lot of IPs now, is that the movies and the episodes and the shows that are being made do not live up to what we've already read in comics and novels, because the people that wrote the comics and novels have thought a lot about it. And look, I don't mean to slag off on Ron Moore and Brandon Braga, who both did amazing work in the series, and they had just written all good things, but they were tasked with writing both at the same time. And I think if they had 6 months to write the script themselves, and that's all they were doing, they could have refined. The ideas were good, but they could have refined them and made them more believable and figured out different ways to do things. So it's 30 years later, and admittedly, a lot of you might not remember this, but in 1994, arguably 30 years ago, was when Star Trek was at its absolute peak. Star Trek The Next Generation went off the air, huge ratings. For a syndicated, it changed the landscape of TV as a syndicated drama, an hour-long syndicated drama. It went off the air, incredible. The ratings were huge, and then 6 months later, this movie came out. Kirk and Picard were on the cover of Time magazine. Star Trek was no longer niche fandom; it was mainstream. You had Deep Space Nine, was already on the air. It started in '93, so you're now into multiple. You're into the second season. UPN, the United Paramount Network, was going to start, so they knew their flagship show was going to be Star Trek Voyager. That was in development. Star Trek was in the air, as Steve Sansweet would say, in the air and everywhere. And it was a big deal. And Star Trek was definitely at its zenith, at its most popular in 94. So when Generations came out, look, I enjoyed seeing Kirk, but even it felt more like I was watching Shatner. I know he was riding horses and all that, but it was a little underwhelming. A fist fight, an Estes model rocket. It wasn't an Estes model rocket. I'm just saying that. But, I built the Honest John, the Maxi Brute Honest John, when I was a kid. It was a big fucking rocket. It wasn't much smaller than what they fired off in Generations. And it was like, that's what they're doing? You have a Klingon bird of prey taking out the Enterprise D because, which they already had somebody looking through Geordi's visor in TNG. It was all these repeated tropes. And to be fair, I thought Generations, as beautiful as it was, I mean, it was basically, okay, yeah, they did go to the Valley of Fire in Nevada. Great. But for the most part, and they did go to the California coast and shoot a scene with a boat. But for the most part, everything else was kind of a bottle show. Standing sets, all that kind of thing. And there wasn't a lot of scope to it, and there wasn't a lot of imagination that worked for me. It was cool to see it. I'm glad it kicked off the Next Generation series of films. But I think that the Next Generation series, I think most people would agree with me that all four of those movies, even First Contact, as fun as it might be, kind of goofy. If you watch it again, and I just did, because I did get the beautiful Vice Press poster for First Contact, the foil version. I'd highly recommend their posters. Go to vice-press.com, maybe. It's in the UK. They make great stuff. Matt Ferguson and his team over there, they make great Star Trek posters. Star Trek 3, their Star Trek 3 poster, beautiful. The 40th anniversary poster, beautiful. You go, Matt Ferguson. I did buy. He didn't do the First Contact poster, but I got it because it's great. But that could have been better. It all could have been better. And look, I haven't been just complaining about Star Trek since 2009. I've been complaining about Star Trek for a lot. I love Star Trek, but I complain about it. I want it to be better. And Generations could have been great. And if you read Star Trek Federation, the novel, you'll be like, I mean, it would have cost $500 million, but still, you were like, well, what about this? What about this? Why don't you adapt this? Don't know. Anyway, I wanted to read that, wanted to talk about Star Trek Generations with you guys. Let me see what you guys are saying, because, man, there has been a lot of super chats and things coming in. Does everybody hate me? Is this going to be a lot of hate that's going to come in my way? We'll see. Let's see what you guys have to say. Hate. There is a tip a tip. I know tips on a super chat. If you want to leave a tip, the tip link is down below in the description, along with the links to the articles and the movies I'm going to talk about shortly. Tip from Anonymous. Hey, Rob, I just finished reading Federation by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, which was fantastic. I've read their novel Prime Directive as well, also excellent. Are there any other Star Trek novels you'd recommend? Well, those are two of the finest Star Trek novels I would recommend. Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens are two of my very favorite Star Trek novelists. They're also TV producers, and they've written other novels other than Star Trek books, but they have... So William Shatner wrote 10 Star Trek novels with Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens. You can call it the Shatnerverse, but I would highly recommend the first 3 novels, which is generally considered or called the Odyssey Trilogy. The first book, The Ashes of Eden. The Ashes of Eden. Oh my God, should that have been a Star Trek movie? First of all, what a great title. After Star Trek VI, they absolutely could have made The Ashes of Eden. They hadn't written it yet, so they couldn't have. But The Ashes of Eden could have been adapted into a film. And they could have even made it after Generations just had to take place before. So it's The Ashes of Eden, The Return, and Preserver. There's so much Star Trek lore in these novels. Those 3 books, if you don't have to read the rest of the Star Trek novels. There's a Mirror Universe trilogy, and then there's the Captain's Glory, Captain's Blood trilogy, which they wrote me in as a character, by the way. But those 3 books I would recommend. And I love David Mack, which I have an interview that's going to be part of the 1000th episode, an interview with David Mack, one of my favorite Star Trek writers, both Diane Duane and David Mack. And David Mack wrote 2 series I would recommend everybody read. The duology, the 2 Mirror Universe novels, Sorrows of Empire and Rise Like Lions. Read those 2 books. And also his Destiny trilogy. If you want to read not just an epic Star Trek story, but an epic science fiction story, read David Mack's Destiny trilogy. It's called that. It's collected together. It's 3 separate novels. It's amazing. There are a lot of great Star Trek novelists. Peter David, Christopher Bennett. There's so many. Diane Duane, I love her early books. If you want to read early Star Trek novels from the 80s, read The Wounded Sky, which was loosely adapted kind of for Where No One Has Gone Before in the first season of TNG. And if you want to read her Rihansu trilogy, do that, beginning with My Enemy, My Ally. Those books are great. There's so many great Star Trek novels, but that's another thing. One day I'll have to print my definitive list. iCritic has been a VIP member of the PGS community, celebrates 19 months of membership, and he says, I feel Traffic should have won Best Picture that year. I do feel that the Academy may give him Director this year. Traffic won for Best Director, I believe, for Steven Soderbergh, and it beat Ridley Scott out, but they were both directed for Best Picture. The Academy may give him Director this year, but not Picture, which would be funny. It will be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of great stuff. Conclave, I think, is great film. And we'll see. The Dead Man writes, Hey, Rob, happy birthday. The only thing I know about Dune is the new movies. I was very confused with Dune Prophecy. I can understand. Anyway, when I first watched Generations, I thought Picard was going to bring Kirk into the 24th century. Yeah, I know, right? But he didn't really belong there. I understand. I think that the Dune Prophecy I did not love. And I think that was a hard nut to crack, and I don't know if that's the direction they should have gone in. I understand why they went that way, but a show that takes place 10,000 years before the Dune universe that we know, it didn't really feel like it took place 10,000 years before, but we'll see where it goes. I'll give it a chance. Order 42 show. Order 42. Is that the order that gives you the answer to life, the universe, and everything before you kill the Jedi? The reason I love Ridley Scott, the special features on physical media are the best. He loves to teach and share techniques unlike other directors. I agree. And Charlie de Lauzirika, a good friend of mine, has done a lot of Ridley Scott documentaries. He's done some banger documentaries. And, obviously his Dangerous Days, the documentaries he did on the 5-disc Blade Runner set are essential. The Alien documentaries Charlie did are amazing. And then on all the other movies that Charlie worked on with Ridley, a lot of great stuff. You should see it. Jeremy says, book recommendation, Tainted Cup. I don't want a girl to say that to me. So good, you should read it. Well, Tainted Cup. I will read that. Now I want to know what you know what? Let's look it up. We'll use that newfangled contraption called the internet. We're going to find out, what does Tainted Cup book. What is it? It's got 4.5 stars. The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett revolves around an eccentric detective named Anna Delabra, an investigator whose reputation for brilliance, I'm already in, is matched only by her eccentricities. And it's a fantasy with a mystery twist from the Edgar-winning, multiple Hugo nominated Robert Jackson Bennett. Well, this sounds great, actually. And Tainted Cup is from the Shadow of Leviathan series. By the way, who doesn't love the word Leviathan? Leviathan is so great. Wow, he's a Hugo-nominated author. And, wow. In Dertana's greatest mansion, a high imperial officer lies dead, killed to all appearances when a tree erupted from his body. Even here at Empire's borders, where contagions abound and the blood of Leviathans works strange magical changes, it's death both terrifying and impossible. Wow, dude, I'm in. Count me in. And that was published in February of this year. Wow. You know what? I'm putting that in my Amazon cart right now. That sounds dope. I'm in. You got me, Jer. Major Chai Chai says, cheers to 999 episodes. You know, if I flip that over, it's 666. Message? I don't know. Should I start drinking adrenochrome and torturing children? Don't know. Don't think so. That would be a bad look for me, and I'm not really interested in doing that. Who wants to live forever anyway? Adrenochrome doesn't work. Just saying. Cheers to 999 episodes. Looking forward to the 1000th. Well, that's coming soon. In 5 days. B. Depp says, haven't been around in a while live, but I've not stopped supporting you, and don't miss Let's Get Physical Media. Looking forward to the 1000th. I'm holding hope that your interview with George Feltenstein includes an Under the Rainbow announcement. You can ask him yourself. December 15th, we're going live. Joe Panora says, random question. I remember you want to do a story on the Book of Job. Have you watched The Chosen? I have not watched The Chosen. I don't know if it's any good, but I haven't watched it. Yes, I'm obsessed with the Book of Job, making a modern take on the Book of Job. People have said that there's things that have come out recently that have happened, but and also Clive Barker's story, The Yattering and Jack, is a similar kind of a story. Actually, that's more of Screw Tape Letters. That's what I mean. That's wrong. Yattering Jack is Screw Tape Letters, not Book of Job. I'm wrong. I'm mistaken. Blue Sunrise says, subs will come and go. Keep being authentic. I always will. And on that note, I drink to you. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I'm sorry I melted your brain with that unschooling video, but to be honest, I felt the same way when I watched it. Okay. So Tom Jr. Jackson, there's something called unschooling. What is unschooling, you might ask? There's lots of TikTok videos. I went down a rabbit hole. Unschooling is allowing children to decide what they want to learn. You let kids know, because kids know everything. So if they don't want to learn how to read, they don't have to learn how to read. I think one of the great problems with American civilization now is our young population, Gen Zero, as I like to call them. Gen Zero, as in ground zero or as in know nothing. Gen Zero does not have a broad base of general knowledge. Now, I grew up on Mercer Island in Washington. If you look at it now, you'll laugh. You'll be like, what are you, part of the 1%? I wasn't at the time. My parents bought a house for $30,000 that I grew up in. That's now worth $2.5 million. Go figure. But whatever. So Mercer Island, because it was all families that were upper middle class for the most part, we passed all of our school levies. But the thing that I got in a public school, I got a very wide, broad base of knowledge. Great teachers. I had great teachers. I can name all of my elementary school teachers and my kindergarten teacher. Miss Savage, for kindergarten, Mrs. Frum for first grade, Mrs. Bard, who then became Mrs. Reith in second grade, Mrs. Young, Mrs. Young in third grade, I'm Mrs. Walton in fourth grade, Karen Francisco in fifth grade, and Bob Park in sixth grade. Those are my elementary school teachers. And the broad base of knowledge that we were instilled with, and then I went to South Mercer Junior High before it became a middle school, and then went to Mercer Island High School. The Mercer Island school system had incredible programs. The teachers were some people didn't have, I had a great time in high school. I had a great time in school. I love school. Loved it. And it was great, but they gave us a broad base of knowledge. And by the way, they expected you to perform. If you didn't do your work, you got bad grades. And when I got bad grades, I didn't get that bad of grades, but I was never, my head was in the clouds and I was always doing something. I would get like 3.3, 3.5 grade point averages, but everyone's like, you're a 4-point student. I'm like, I'm not going to fucking do all the work. I get too many movies to see, too many books to read, too many girls to take out on the weekends, too much work to do at video stores. 3.5 is fine. I'm not trying to get into an Ivy League school. But everyone was saying, you could live up more to your potential. Whatever. They say that now. But broad base of knowledge. And I didn't realize how lucky I was until I got into college. When I got into college, I'm like, where did you grow up, man? I mean, everything from mathematics to geography to biology to history. We had a great broad base of knowledge when we left Mercer Island High School. I did not value it at the time when I was getting it, even though I was getting it. Nowadays, I am shocked at meeting people, especially younger people, and the lack of a broad base of knowledge that they have or interest. It's shocking. And the idea of unschooling, like, why would you do that? Here's something I learned in school. A teacher said this to me, and I think I said this before recently on a show. Like, I would always get A's on tests, but I wouldn't get an A in the class. I'd get a B or something because I wouldn't do the daily work, like in math or English class, or something. And a teacher once said to me, we know you can get an A on every test, but part of learning is also understanding that the daily work, turning in work on time, and doing what's expected of you, even though you might not, you don't need to do it necessarily, that's part of life. And what you're learning is working on someone else's schedule, and you're learning to do the work that you might not want to do. But this idea now that I see everyone like, if it's not something I like, life is hard. And we're seeing a generation, we see them on social media, that isn't used to dealing with things that they don't necessarily want to do. But that's life. That's what you have to do. That's what the struggle is real, people. And I think this unschooling, Tom, when I'm reading about that kids only should learn what they want to learn, I'm like, why do parents believe this? I mean, the whole point is you never know when learning is its own reward. You never know when you're going to be you might be in Bali with a bunch of hot chicks running around, and somehow you're going to need to do something that a broad base of knowledge might make you the one guy in the room or the one girl in the room or the one person in the room that knows how to do something randomly. And people are going to look at you and go, how do you know how to do that? Well, I paid attention in physics course, or I paid attention in shop. We don't even have shop anymore. I had woodworking in junior high school. I built my mother a planter, like a thing that's about 4 feet tall that you put a plant on. She still has it. It was built that well. Anyway, horrifying. Unschooling, dude. Terrible. I wish I didn't go down that. What a depressing thing to read. Brian Osborne says, hey, Rob, have you read many horror comics and do you have any recommendations? Well, I used to read all like the Vertigo stuff. I loved Hellblazer, John Constantine Hellblazer. I love the Hellblazer comics with Jamie Delano, The Fear Machine. Those are the horror comics that I read. I mean, I haven't been reading. I'm so out of the loop. I buy omnibuses when something interests me, but usually like 3 or 4 years after it comes out. Although I did recently order the Micronauts Volume 2 omnibus. But yeah, I loved the DC Vertigo comics were sort of my jam. Whether not just Hellblazer and Swamp Thing, but if you haven't read Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, that to me is a quintessential. It's one of the greatest horror comics ever. It's great. It's really, really, really great. And if you want to spend the money, I highly recommend. People are going to say I'm sacrilegious when I say this, get the recolored absolute versions. Those absolute versions are absolutely stunning. They are stunning. And they're amazing. But, that's kind of old school. Brett Dean, Shout Section Big Band, says, reused Bird of Prey explosion from Star Trek 6 is still visual poetry compared to modern Trek. I dug the cinematography as well. Yes, what Brett Dean brings up, which is very astute, when they finally defeat Lursen B'Etor, and why would you, that's another thing about Generations. I get it. They brought Lursen B'Etor back from the series, but why not give us a new General Chang, or a new Krug, who's right back there? Why not do that? But no, they had to bring back Lursen B'Etor, which I love Lursen B'Etor. But when they show the Bird of Prey exploding, they actually reuse the shot of Chang's ship exploding from Star Trek 6. I get it. They're saving money. But the Dead Man says, Rob, I still disagree with that. The Lotus Eaters episode of Strange New Worlds, I thought that was very much a TOS-like episode. Yeah, but it was, again, not great. There was too many things about it that I thought was like, come on. They're not well thought out. Royston S. Bailey says, was TNG the only profitable Trek series? Oh, no. When it was on first run, Star Trek made so much money for Paramount when it went into strip syndication in the early 70s. Everybody ran Star Trek. Played all over the world. They made so much money off the original series. Now, Next Generation was different because it went into strip syndication immediately. So Next Generation was obviously, and it wasn't expensive. But I don't know. I think Star Trek ultimately has probably made more money than Next Generation did, only because it's been airing longer. But it made money. It made money. Maybe not at the time. It didn't make a lot of money, but once it went into strip syndication in the 70s, that was a license to print money for the studio. Although it'd be interesting to look into just how much. That is an interesting question that I can't answer. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to research that and see how that would work out. Scott Bartholomew says Otoy is the new Trek. Well, we're going to get to that. Jerry Mananen says, just bought 15 new books for some winter reading. It snowed today in Finland. $999. Can't wait for your 1000th show. Hope you have some book topics too. Well, I've got 2 authors. Sure. Plungecast says, I've had the Generations hardcover for 15 years. Never read it as I thought it was just an adaptation. Happy birthday, mate. No, it does more. The Generations, usually the Star Trek novels, the novelizations of the movies add some real interesting insight. Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3, the Vonda McIntyre adaptations are great. And Star Trek 4. Yeah. The Robo producer is here. Rob, I know you saw Joker 2 twice. Did you like it? Guilty pleasure. I did. I don't understand the hate. Fleck chose himself over the Joker. Look, I did like Joker 2. I thought for that very reason. I thought Joker 2, like Quentin Tarantino said, it was they made a movie that was not for the audience that loved the Joker. I thought it was a really interesting film for its own sake. The audience hated it because it's not what they wanted. It's a beautifully made movie, and it certainly doesn't give us what we want to have happen, which I understand. But I did enjoy it. Scott Bartholomew said, give us a sneak peek of 1000. Well, Scott, as you know, I was going after getting a bunch of interviews with people. Then it became too hard because I was working on True Noir, which I'm still working on. So I decided to make it about you guys. And I've asked people to write in. I've got all kinds of great topics, all kinds of great people. I will be breaking down a schedule, which if you can't adhere to the schedule, I'll let you in. It's going to be like whoever shows up, if they can wait or whatever. The show's going to be 16 hours long. It's going to start at 8 a.m. Saturday morning and go to about 12:30 at night. It's going to be 1,000 minutes. Now, I'm going to have to break it up in the middle, not very long, because you can only broadcast live on YouTube for 12 hours, and you have to start over. So I'm going to have part 1 and part 2, and I'll set it up so you will know. Now, let's get to the interesting thing that happened today. So, the next article that I'm going to read, before I So I did a show last year, about 150 shows ago, about a company called Otoy, Otoy, and they teamed up with the Roddenberry Archive. And the Roddenberry Archive is doing amazing things like you can have a 3D walkthrough of all the different starships. And they're doing all kinds of things, but they have made 4 short films that are more like tone poems that celebrate the entire history of Star Trek. And the 4 films are called, the first one that they made was called 765-874. Now, is 765-874 Jenny's number? That's 8675309, so it's not. But 765-974 is actually Yeoman Colt's service number. And Yeoman Colt was a character on the Enterprise in The Cage, in the original pilot. That shouldn't be canonical. It should only be canonical in The Menagerie, the 2-part episode of the original series from the first season. But anyway, everyone keeps going back to The Cage. The Cage didn't even air on TV until 1988. But anyway, Yeoman Colt, who is a yeoman, that is her service number. How do we know this? It was established, get this, in a comic book. So back in the mid-90s, when I was a Star Trek consultant for Paramount, for actually Viacom licensing, DC had been doing a bang-up job with the Star Trek comic license since 1983. They debuted a comic in the wake of Wrath of Khan. They did Mike Barr and Tom Sutton and Ricardo Villagrán were doing the art, and it was great. They did this like 10-part Mirror Universe story, and I love they were the first people to put a Klingon on the bridge, Conan, and people like Diane Duane wrote for those comics. They had Peter David writing for the comics. They had Michael Jan Friedman writing for the comics, and DC did an incredible job. They did a graphic novel. Chris Claremont, X-Men Chris Claremont, adapted the Ashes of Eden book that I talked about earlier for the comic book medium. I mean, DC did a bang-up job, but in the mid-90s, somehow the powers that be at Paramount did not like the fact that DC, which was a Warner Brothers company, was publishing Star Trek IP. Didn't dig it. Even though DC did an incredible job, was that Seinfeld enough? An incredible job doing the Star Trek comics. And they wanted to pull the license. They did pull the license from Paramount. Paramount pulled the license from DC. And at the time, I was a paid Star Trek consultant for Viacom licensing. I wrote like a 20-page impassioned, I call it it wasn't a mission statement. It was a plea. Oh, it was a pleading, like a legal pleading. Is that what it's called? Why they shouldn't do it. I wasn't asked to write it. I'm like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you taking the DC? They had done such a great job with Next Generation. It was so great. And they didn't. They gave it to Marvel. And let's face it, the Marvel comics were not great. But the best of the Marvel comics they did was the Star Trek The Early Voyages, which were about the adventures of Captain Pike and Yeoman Colt and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise. And it was the best of the at least in my estimation, was the best of the Marvel comics that they put out. Of course, they did not listen to me. You know, they went with Marvel. I understand corporate, none of these people, they made a decision going, they didn't look at the comics. I mean, at the time, Viacom, the people licensing knew it was up, but they couldn't, the people on high are just like, no, we can't have Warner Brothers. They didn't even look. They didn't realize how good the comics actually were. So, and then of course, after that happened, that Wildstorm had the Star Trek license for a while. They went to Malibu for a while, and Mark Altman was writing Deep Space Nine comics, ripping off Anne Frank's story and all that. All this stuff went down, and the Star Trek comic franchise, until IDW, I think they've had it for like the last 20 years, and IDW, to their credit, has done a lot of really great Star Trek comics. So kudos to you, IDW. But for a while, it was DC, and of course, before that, it was Gold Key and all that. But anyway, so Otoy referenced, well, let me read it. So they've done 4 movies, and the first one they did was just called 765-874, Yeoman Colt's service number, taken from that early Voyages comic. And if you watch it, I played them. I think I put it in the description. I did a story about Otoy and what they were all about. Well, so Otoy over the last couple of years they've made 4 movies. They made that one. They made a movie called Regeneration, a movie called Memory Wall, and now the one they dropped today for the 30th anniversary of Generations. And they've all are kind of telling, each one is expanded on the same storyline. They've touched on different things. And it is first of all, it's an encapsulation of the entire Star Trek franchise. And they keep adding things, but basically it goes from Yeoman Colt's point of view to Spock's point of view, and the new movie they dropped today, Unification, was from Kirk's point of view. And it's basically a tone poem, but overall it's about fate, and it's about 2 friends, and it's about Spock and Kirk meeting in essentially the afterlife, or the universe, the multiverse, the Star Trek multiverse. And in a moment that echoes Star Trek the Motion Picture, the This Simple Feeling moment. It's an 8-minute short. By the way, I have all 4 shorts, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut them into one long thing. I'm sure Otoy is going to do this themselves, but I'm just going to cut it into one long thing because I find it interesting how they're adding different elements. They added Gary Mitchell, Gary Lockwood's character from the second pilot in this new movie. So if you haven't seen it, you should. I mean, I'd play them. I played them on the last show. I played them but I think now I don't want to get dinged for it. But anyway, let me read an article about what Otoy is doing and what they're all about. This article, again, dropped today online. And, I want to get into this, and so I can share it with you. So, again, these films are affiliated with Paramount and CBS. This new film that dropped today, Michael Giacchino, who scored the Kelvin timeline films, scored it. But it's got some really interesting stuff, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But let me read you this article. By the way, both William Shatner and Susan Nimoy, Leonard Nimoy's widow, are producers on this new film that dropped today. Otoy, in association with William Shatner and the Nimoy estate, releases 765-874 Unification, commemorating the 30th anniversary of Star Trek Generations. And, of course, if you look in this picture, left to right, Robin Curtis plays Saavik. Executive producer William Shatner is Kirk. Lawrence Selleck, who plays Spock. And Mahe, I can't even pronounce this. Oh, the girl who plays J.M. Colt is Mahe Thalesa? Thalesa? Sounds like a Star Trek name. At the premiere of Unification, they premiered this movie this past weekend in Ticonderoga at James Cawley's The Star Trek Sets. He is the recreation in Ticonderoga, New York. William Shatner was there to watch it. They watched this movie on the bridge, the recreation, the exact recreation of the bridge. If you haven't gone to Ticonderoga and you're a Star Trek fan, go, go, go. It's an amazing experience. On the 30th anniversary of Star Trek Generations, the Archive and William Shatner revisit Captain Kirk's final appearance on screen in a new 8-minute video produced for the Archive app on Apple Vision Pro. 765-874 Unification, launched in tandem with new interactive sets and documentary interviews and behind-the-scenes content celebrating the legacy of the 1994 film. Otoy is proud to release the next major update to the Archive with 765-874 Unification, a mind-bending Star Trek experience celebrating the 30th anniversary of Star Trek Generations, William Shatner's last appearance as Captain Kirk on screen. 765-874 Unification launches today on the Archive web portal and native app, an immersive experimental app designed for Apple Vision Pro. The release is accompanied by new interactive sets, props, and worlds from the 1994 film, as well as a 20-minute retrospective by William Shatner himself, looking back over the last 30 years since he played the legendary character, and his aspirations for the future of Captain Kirk as the franchise approaches the 60-year mark. The full experience with all related extra content is available in its entirety in digital cinema 4K HDR and spatial video, exclusively mastered at peak fidelity for viewing on Apple Vision Pro. Iconic characters from classic Star Trek history were brought to life through the live-action performances of a talented cast, led by veteran TV and film star Sam Witwer as a young James T. Kirk with Lawrence Selleck as Spock. Witwer and Selleck were both filmed in costume, performing as Kirk and Spock on set, aided by both physical and digital prosthetics, resulting in period-accurate portrayals matching the appearance of the characters as they originally appeared in TV and film at the time. William Shatner and Susan Bay Nimoy, widow of the late Leonard Nimoy, served as executive producers on the production. Mr. Shatner worked with the Otoy team to fine-tune the technical and creative direction required to bring his interpretation of Kirk back to live action for the first time in 30 years, including the addition of his voice to narrate a key moment in the experience. Describing 765874 unification and Otoy's digital prosthetic technology used to revisit Star Trek history, William Shatner said it takes years off your face so that in a film you can look 10, 20, 30, 50 years younger than you are. Mr. Shatner surprised fans yesterday when he shared the first private screening at the video at the Star Trek tour in Ticonderoga, New York. Unification was directed by award-winning Spanish filmmaker Carlos Baena from a story by Jules Urbach and features original music by Academy Award-winning Star Trek composer Michael Giacchino. The 8-minute video connects multiple decades of Star Trek lore with nods to Robin Curtis's portrayal of Saavik in Star Trek Through the Search for Spock, J.M. Colt from the 1964 pilot, played by actress Mahe Thalesa, and Gary Mitchell, Kirk's friend from the second Star Trek pilot episode Where No Man Has Gone Before, performed by original actor Gary Lockwood. For post-production and special effects work, skilled artists from Otoy and partner VFX studios combined digital and physical prosthetics with live-action location photography, virtual production, and beautiful CG set extensions to deliver feature film quality visuals. Major scenes in Unification were filmed twice, ensuring coverage to create video and spatial content mastered for Apple Vision Pro. All outdoor filming locations were scanned in and merged with CG set extensions, becoming part of the archive's growing library of 3D worlds and locations, which you can see here. Emmy Award-winning visual effects supervisor Mark Spatney led Otoy's international team of artists and animators, including visual effects artist Neil Smith, J.J. Palomo, and Aaron Westwood. Visual effects and Unification were creating using Otoy's Octane rendering software and the Render Network decentralized GPU rendering platform. Characters and props were digitized using Otoy's Academy Award-winning Light Stage scanning system. The archive is a multi-decade endeavor between Otoy and the Roddenberry estate in collaboration with Paramount Game Studios to catalog key texts and documents from Gene Roddenberry's life and career using immersive technologies. With a mission to canonically memorialize and reference 3D models of the Starship Enterprise, including studio models as filmed on set and life-size 1-to-1 scale in-universe versions, the archive aims to preserve iconic worlds from the Gene Roddenberry era of Star Trek for future generations to experience in new immersive spatial formats like Apple Vision Pro. As part of the archive, Otoy has leveraged advancements in visual production technology and frontier digital workflows pioneered by Otoy to create or recreate set pieces in Star Trek history as 1-to-1 life-size virtual sets. The archive's virtual production and digital makeup technology are used to create documentary shorts and immersive spatial experiences for Apple Vision Pro. The documentary videos are overseen by Roger Lay, Mike and Denise Akuda, and feature Star Trek luminaries such as William Shatner, George Takei, Walter Koenig, director Robert Butler, Terry Matalas, Robin Curtis, Gary Lockwood, writer David Gerald, production designer Dave Blass, and stunt performer Sandra Lee Gimple. The archive can be explored as a native immersive spatial experience for Apple Vision Pro, available on the Apple Store. A limited version of the archive is currently available in 2-dimensional format on the web. Now, I cannot tell you how fucking cool this is. I mean, first of all, you got the right people involved. And I'd love to be involved in something like this, but I've done too many questionable things in my Star Trek past, such as being involved with Prelude to Axanar, and all that, and other things too. But this thing is so fucking rad. Like, if you're a Star Trek fan, this is so next level. And these 4 movies collectively, they're basically a tone poem that is heavily inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey. And this movie, and I'm going to show you. I've got clips. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't watched it already, let me just show you. First of all, it begins showing us Gary Lockwood as, of course, one of Kirk's best friends, Gary Mitchell, from the second Star Trek pilot where no one has gone before. Now, it opens like this. Everyone who knows Star Trek knows what happened to Gary Mitchell. They went through the energy barrier at the end of the galaxy, and both Elizabeth Daner and Gary Mitchell were affected, and their mind powers were exponentially growing, and basically Gary Mitchell was becoming a god. Well, and look at this. This is a recreation of Gary Mitchell. I mean, look at Otoy's technology. I mean, it looks like that's Gary Lockwood himself today. And here he is in front of a star. It's so amazing. Like, Gary Mitchell is clearly a god in this. As I said, this whole movie is basically a tone poem. And I don't know why they didn't incorporate all 4 of the movies together, because the Yeoman Colt stuff, there's a lot of stuff going on with Yeoman Colt that also harks back to this multi-dimensional thing that happened in one of the comics. But so the idea, if you're a Star Trek fan, they're kind of insinuating in this that Gary Mitchell somehow might have survived what happened on Delta Vega. Not the stupid Delta Vega, by the way, in Star Trek 09, the actual real Delta Vega that, that wasn't in view of Vulcan. But so after what happened on Delta Vega, even though he dies there, he goes on to become a godlike being. And the idea is that all the Star Trek multiverse is somehow accessible. And you're getting hints of all this. And again, it's only 8 minutes long. But what ends up happening is that Yeoman Colt, there's a thing in the comics and descends. It's a lot of stuff. I get into it more in the previous video, but on this video, the idea is that Kirk he's in the afterlife, and whether it's because the wormhole aliens, God, the monolith aliens, whatever, Kirk has come in the afterlife, and he's meeting people. He's going through this beautiful, bucolic, maybe it's the universal Garden of Eden that the Preservers created. Who knows? Maybe the Preservers, of course, they ruined that on modern Star Trek 2, but whatever. So this is what's amazing. So here is Sam Witwer playing Kirk with their digital prosthetics and real prosthetics. I mean, it's incredible. It's absolutely, it's spot on. It's so good that even the velour looks correct. And there's a great moment in all of this. I mean, a really fantastic moment where Kirk, it's very much inspired by 2001. And there's a moment where, again, it's Kirk going into the afterlife, and he sees. So at first you see Kirk in Generations. So it's after he died in Generations, and you see him here, and here he is in Generations. And what's really interesting about this, I don't want to ruin it for you, but there's a character, Yor, that was introduced in Discovery. The character of Yor. Here's the character of Yor that. In Terra Firma, this character from the 24th century transitioned time and dimensions and was apparently the first Star Trek character who did that. So this is actually from a Discovery episode, and I'll hand it to them. And here is Yor again in this Otoy film. So here's how Yor appeared in the original Discovery episode Terra Firma, and here's how Yor appears in this story. And in the afterlife, and your transition between multi-dimensions and multiple time frames. And in this, Yor hands something to Kirk, which we see later, and gives it to Kirk as he starts walking into his afterlife. And what he gave him, what Yor gave him, is his command insignia, which he puts on. So unlike Generations, Kirk is now in the afterlife, and he has his command insignia on. And basically, he walks up to see... And what's great is it's very 2001. He ends up seeing, he turns into his young self, then he sees his old self here on the left in Generations, and then he sees himself as he looked in Wrath of Khan. And it's very 2001, and I'm not going to lie. By the end of this, I was fucking bawling. It's 8 minutes long. And the music and what happens, I mean, it is basically the end of 2001. Mike Akuda and Denise Akuda and Darren Doctorman said, I guarantee you it was probably their idea. They're like, let's do Star Trek's version of 2001, except instead of Kirk going into a hotel room, he's going to go see Spock and they're going to meet in the afterlife or whatever. And that's basically what happens. But before that, he ends up and he sees, here's Robin Curtis as Saavik, as old Saavik. And who is behind? You think that at first I was like, is that on the right there? Is that Sarek? And then I realized that's not Sarek. You know who that is? They're so fanatical over at Otoy. I mean, I can't tell you, and why not? But when you have the Akudas and you have Terry Metalis and you have Darren Doctorman and you have Roger Lay, who I work with on the Star Trek documentaries, they're so fanatical that they're touching on the fact that, as we all know, in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, they leave Saavik on Vulcan. Why? It wasn't in the movie, but Saavik was pregnant with Spock and her son. That was conceived on the Genesis planet when Spock was going through Pon farr in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Well, that's Spock's son behind it, or behind old Saavik. I mean, that's how crazy this tone poem is. And then so Kirk wanders, he becomes young and old, and he's dealing with himself in the afterlife. And here's what's really crazy. Here's a picture. I stole this from Dave Blass. Here's Sam Witwer, the great Sam Witwer, as Kirk, who had to do all the mannerisms and everything. But that's Sam Witwer looking like Sam Witwer. But they were able to use the digital technology and make Sam Witwer's face look like that. Just like they were able to do Leonard Nimoy on Selleck before. And it's so insane. It's so crazy. It's so amazing. You got to love it. And then, of course, they did things like when they show Yeoman Colt, of course, you go back and they show this is the area from the comic book. And this is how deep these guys go. This is how fanatical and canonical and crazy this is. This scene on the right here is from the comic book, from the New Voyages, the Early Voyages comic, and here's how they recreate it. And when you look into this, you can go through time and space, and that's what Yeoman Colt does. And in her mind, and it's the Memory Wall movie that Otoy did, one of the three earlier ones. I mean, it's insane. Not only do that, but in this movie, they touch on, this is from Picard season 3, and this is showing the schematics of Kirk's body. They have a Daystrom Institute, where early on in the first Otoy movies, they show Spock over Kirk's gravesite at the end of Generations, which, by the way, is also a location from the Reeve Stevens novel, The Return, if you haven't, and it even touches on that. This touches on The Return. It's all deep, deep beta canon that they're turning into regular canon. So Spock and Kirk, like Kirk is walking through, and it all leads up to Kirk finding Spock. And it's so, again, it's so fanatical. They even do things like, in it, this is right out of Star Trek the Motion Picture. Look at this scene. Kirk goes up to Spock and sees him on, I guess, where he is laid to rest. And I mean, look at it. It's incredible. I can't believe this even exists. And again, this simple feeling is beyond V'ger's comprehension. It's all right there. And they did such a good job of just going deep, deep, deep into canon. It's so crazy that even, okay, you see it in the foreground here, the blurred out thing. I thought I had a picture of this, but I guess I forgot to use it. The blurred out thing is Spock's book from Star Trek Beyond that Spock gives to Kirk of the crew from the pictures from like Star Trek V. It's that canonical. It's that crazy and insane. So the whole thing is crazy, and Otoy did it, and what they're doing is amazing. I need to get an Apple Vision Pro. Again, this is all stuff like, here's at the bottom, you see the comic book panel, then Otoy recreated this. This is the Enterprise in the museum. Well, it's not the Fleet Museum we saw in Picard Season 3, but it's the Fleet Museum that was in the comic book from early Voyages. It's so insane, and if you're a Star Trek fan, all of this will make you cry. I kid you not. And again, it's a tone poem. A lot of people go, well, Rob, what's it about? It's confusing. I don't know what it means. Look, if you're someone like myself and you've been so steeped in Star Trek canon for as long, what Otoy is doing in this, when you put them all together, it's probably going to be 10 minutes with the credits. And not only that, when you see the credits, this is where I'm sure Darren Dochterman had something to say. The credits are the Star Trek The Motion Picture credits. It's the proper font. It's not the Star Trek 2 credits. I don't think. It's the Star Trek The Motion Picture credits. There's William Shatner's credit, and there's Susan Bay Nimoy's credit. And come on. And if you wanted to know other people who are involved in this, look at this. Special thanks to Kevin Feige, Ari Emanuel, if you know your power players in Hollywood, and Alex Ross. Come on, man. Theme from Star Trek by Alexander Courage. The clip from Star Trek 2, courtesy of CBS Studios. Additional special thanks to SAG-AFTRA, Mike and Denise Akuda. I mean, crazy time. And look who was involved in this whole thing. Paramount, Star Trek, SAG-AFTRA, and then the Skywalker sound. Mix the sound for this shit. And I'm like, okay, why can't you make real Star Trek? This is real Star Trek. This is so deep cut canon Star Trek. And then, I have to return to the swill that we're going to get. The ridiculously arch and silly Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds doesn't have a tenth of the canon. This is so, for all of you canonistas in there, I mean, I'm telling you, this is just catnip for me. And even this character that was introduced in Discovery, I'll give him that. Even I should hate this, but, because he can travel through time and space, why not? I don't hate it. Don't hate it. Wait a minute. Is this the picture I want to show? Yeah, see, there's the book. There's the book from Star Trek Beyond. So you've got Early Voyages comic books. You've got Yeoman Colt from The Cage. You have Gary Mitchell from Where No One Has Gone Before. You have more stuff from the comics. You've got all of this stuff that touches on all of the different iterations of Star Trek. And God bless you. And at the end, you put Kirk and Spock together. Star Trek The Motion Picture, and then look at this. Look at this shot. They're looking out into the sunset. That's the thing we never got. I'm telling you, by this shot, looking out into the sun, I mean, I was crying. I was crying when they were recreating this simple feeling from Star Trek The Motion Picture. But I got to tell you, by the time I got here, I was a weepy mess. And this is all, if you look at this technology. Now, remember, this is amazing. This is amazing technology, and it looks, here's the one thing, nobody talks. It's the talking that gives it away. So it's easy when you don't have to make people talk, and they can do this. And they do a fine job of it, but it's amazing. Making people talk is different. Nobody talks in this. You have voiceover, one little voiceover, and that's it. But the care and the love with what Otoy is doing, and the fact that they're using what we would call extended universe material, and they're making it canonical. Unbelievable. I'm going to cut all 4 of the films together into one thing just because I want to. Because there's lots of cool shit in the other 3 that aren't in this, which I don't understand. I thought that they would build and build and build and add everything together into one long supercut, which is only going to be like 10 minutes. But they didn't do that. But, I can. Because I want to. But the love which went into this, and if you know what you're watching, I'm telling you, I was just like, wow, I can't even believe that this exists, to be honest, because it represents everything that I've talked about ad infinitum. How long have you listened to me bitch and moan and complain about Star Trek? And like, why don't you go and adapt this stuff? The fact that I want to know, like, they talk about what Otoy is doing, but I want to know, like, because I know Darren wasn't a big fan of the comics, but I want to know who decided to go to someone knew. They're like, we're going to go to the Early Voyages comic because they were good, and we're going to pick out Yeoman Colt. And if you look at the first things about Yeoman Colt meeting Spock, and like the fact that she jumped in, the fact that they took out elements from that comic, it's actually a 4-part comic, that they did it, it's amazing. And if you watch the even the choices of the facial expressions and all that, I mean, these people, they knew their shit. Like, this stuff is deep, deep, deep. Like it, and for me, here's all I want. All I want from my Star Trek is to know that the people who are creating Star Trek at least know as much as I do. And these people do. I mean, you fucking believe. Now, I know that Darren's involved, and I know that Ikuda's involved, and friends of mine for years and years and years. But to see this, I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. And the fact that, like, they made me like the edition from Discovery was the one thing that was cool. You know, I'll buy into it. I'll buy into it. But you know what? When you see this, man, come on. This simple feeling. I should have known. What should you have known? The fact that even the camera angles are like right out of Star Trek the Motion Picture. And everybody knows Star Trek the Motion Picture is my favorite Star Trek movie. You all know that. And there's a few added camera angles, like this angle. Come on, man. And another cool angle is this overhead angle. And this is all virtual. They had to render this shit. And I mean, unbelievable. Unbelievable. And even this shot of Kirk. Look at the difference between this Kirk and, of course, Generations Kirk. Come on. And it's just, they knew. They knew. They knew what they were doing. And when you watch it, you can't help. Come on, when you get to this stuff, I know people are probably, you're all probably looking at me going, what? What? Look, I've spent, since 2009, I have felt that every iteration of Star Trek that they've given me is a slap to the face. It's a bunch of people that didn't do their work. They didn't take any time. Like when Nicholas Meyer, he had never seen Star Trek when he got the job to work on Star Trek 2. He had to rewrite Jack Soward's script in a very short period of time. What did he do? He asked Gene Roddenberry, got the Horatio Hornblower idea, understood what that was, but then he immersed himself in Star Trek episodes, and he learned what Star Trek was. And while I do think that Star Trek 2 is not necessarily perfect, it's clearly the best Star Trek movie. It's too, it is too nautical. Everything from the pea coats and all that, the mighty maroons. I mean, no one's going to wear those on a starship. The reason the clothes look the way they did in Star Trek the Motion Picture, and if you look at the Otoy stuff from early, one of the things that I love was, oh my God, it's Spock in the Star Trek the Motion Picture uniform. That when he's mind melding with Yeoman Colt, it was awesome. I want to play him, but if you watch my other one, I played him. I never got dinged for that. I didn't get a copyright strike, but I think this is because it's got more attention on it. If I played it, I would get a copyright strike. But who knows? This shit was catnip. But also, it proves something that I think is really interesting. So, philosophically, I am against recreating dead actors. But in this case, you had both Shatner participating and you had Susan Nimoy participating. And this was done with such care and reverence. And the fact that you brought all these other characters into it, like, Robin Curtis, you gotta love what went on. And it really made me, I've been contemplating this all day. If things are done like this, and as a fan of Star Trek fiction, and the fact that they've touched on extended universe stuff like the comics, and they've touched on things that should be canonical that aren't canonical because we didn't see them on screen, like the fact that Saavik was pregnant in Star Trek 4. That was supposed to be there, it just wasn't. And the fact that they've done all of this stuff, I mean, ultimately, this is the 2001 Dave Bowman ending in the hotel room for Kirk and Spock that we've always wanted, or we always wanted something, we just didn't know what it was. I can't think of anything cooler than this. And I want to go put all four of these movies together because I have them on my hard drive. I download that shit. Come on. So what Otoy is doing, and I've seen other, like the walkthroughs of the ships. These are the people that are doing what Star Trek fans want, and they're giving it the reverence that it needs. I haven't cried at anything in Star Trek since 2009, except tears of horror and anger. I cried at the end of this 8-minute short. Giacchino's music. Is it Giacchino? I couldn't handle it. I couldn't, this simple feeling, the Star Trek the Motion Picture stuff, they got me. And I haven't felt that way about Star Trek in a long time, unless I go back and, watch the old stuff. But they did it, man. This thing they got it. And I don't know who decided or who made those decisions. I can only imagine that what the Roddenberry Archive and Otoy, when they have to have conversations with what they, I mean, when you're talking to John Van Sitters, he gets it. He gets it. But trying to clear this stuff, Who's going to pay for this? I don't know. I would love to. Where's the making of? I'm sure Roger will do the great definitive making of all this, because they need to do it. But I want to know what it's like. How does corporate look at this when Otoy's like, yeah, man, this is what we want to do. We want to make this thing, and Shatner's going to be in it. Nimoy's going to be in it. I'm sure they're going like, what the fuck? Anyway, this was great. Everybody who was involved in this, kudos to you. They should give you a show. Give Otoy a show. You got to get great writers. Bring on the Reeve Stevens. Bring on David Mack. He was a consultant on the first season of Prodigy. Bring on the real writers. And let's have Otoy start making episodes. How about redo the animated series? I mean, come on. If Sam Witwer can make Kirk look like this, and you've got the vocal tracks, go do the animated series. Redo them all. Redo all 22 episodes, because you can. You can redo them. Do them. They probably already thought of this, because I'm sure Darren and Mike and Denise have already thought of this, but why not? And do whatever else you can. I don't know. It's harder to make people talk. But anyway, I know I'm probably babbling. You don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. But to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Generations, everybody who's involved in this deserves a gold star. You get my seal of approval. You got my tears. If that's what you wanted, you made me cry. So there you go. Everybody go and look at it. And by the way, you've got to go up and if you let me tell you, you should watch these in order. So the order you should watch them is the first one is called 765874. That's the first one. Just that number. They're all on YouTube. The second one is called Memory Wall. And these are short. They're like 30 seconds long. The third one is called Regeneration. And the next one is called Unification. And go watch them in that order, because they all have different things. I mean, I don't understand. This is something I don't understand, why they didn't use all four of these in one long supercut. Because they keep adding to them, and maybe it's because, okay, if you're using Yeoman Colt, and then you've got Gary Mitchell at the front, like I'm sure there was a reason why, but it all works together. But go check out all four, because all four are definitely worth watching. And so again, it's 765874. It's Memory Wall, it's Regeneration, and Unification. So watch all four of those. So there you go. I'm babbling. I have nothing more to say about this. But what Otoy is doing is amazing. Oh, and there's one other thing. There's if you really want to appreciate, let me put this on the first story I did on this last year. There was an article I found that I'm going to put in the chat right now. I'll put this in the chat, and you can read this article, because it does a great. He hadn't seen, obviously, reunification or unification, but I'll put this in the chat. Look at this blog post, and it'll take you through. He does a really good job of breaking down what is going on in the first three. So I talked about that in the show last year. So anyway, yeah, I'm telling you. Who would have thought that Generations, a movie I don't really like very much, would bring 30 years later this short film from Otoy that in 8 minutes made me feel more about Star Trek than the last 15 years of Star Trek has. And there's a reason. There's a reason. We should all understand what that reason is. But again, I'm babbling. I'm going to get off this show before I'm embarrassing myself even more than I already have. So let me go check and see what you guys are saying in the chat. Is everyone laughing at me? Probably. Why not? I understand. I deserve to be laughed at. But it's amazing. So the Robo Producer has been a member for 15 months. B Things says, I know people think it looks dated, but all I want is for stuff to genuinely have the costume and production style of TOS. Paramount doesn't get it. First of all, let's just say it with me now, B Things. Star Trek is a period piece about a future that's never going to happen. It is an alternate future, and there is no reason. In the 30th anniversary of Star Trek, it showed us when we saw Trials and Tribulations, when Deep Space Nine went back and revisited Trouble with Tribbles, it all works. this modern, ridiculous idea that we have to give everything a visual updating. If you go to the Otoy site and you actually look at how consistent the bridge designs were, look, if you try and make sense of the interior of the Starship Discovery, it doesn't work. Roller coaster turbo lifts, there was no thought. One of the really interesting things about modern Star Trek, actually Star Trek, well, the original Star Trek, you get to go, because of the menagerie, using the cage again, you immediately have 11 years of Star Trek history during the first season of Star Trek, because you see where the Enterprise was 11 years previous, and then you jump ahead to the first season of Star Trek, and you see how the bridge changed. And they incorporated that into Star Trek. And then at the end of its 5-year mission, if you want to include the animated series as canonical, then you jump ahead to Star Trek The Motion Picture. They figured out the interior design of the Enterprise, which you could see a cutaway to, that was actually canonical. And then as they move through Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, there was, because a lot of the Okudas, Mike Okuda's first, he worked on Star Trek VI, and he was part of the art department from 1986 to 2005. Mike Okuda was part of that art department, keeping things, Rick Sternbach and him doing the blueprints. There was a consistency to all that. All of that was out the fucking window with Star Trek 09. And part of the reason we as fans, there were inconsistencies, sure, but part of the reason that we loved being fans was you had the whole backgrounder movement. People like Larry Nemechek was involved in that, where people were trying to figure out how the inconsistencies could be made to work through common sense and practicality. That was part of what being a Star Trek fan was. That's why there were so many fan-made blueprints in the late 70s and early 80s, because they had the Franz Joseph blueprints to work from, and everything was done in the same style. Even fans would adopt that style because they thought it was canonical. Even the blueprints themselves weren't. It was incredible. All that went out the window, and then it became like you could not believe the Star Trek that they were showing you, because if you look at Star Trek 09, the interior of the Enterprise makes little sense. Little sense. And there was no effort. Discovery, Jesus Christ. My God, people should be embarrassed about that show. None of it makes any sense. And if you read the original 13 outlines for the show, there was no spore drive. As I've said before, the mycellular network was all about terraforming, but that went out the window. Let's rip off Dune. Oh, wait, whatever. You've heard me say it a million times. I don't have to say it anymore. But Otoy knows what's up. And the thing is, all of these people like Otoy, the problem is, then they have to figure out all the gobbledygook that was made from 2009, how to fit it into continuity, which is galling to the extreme. But they have to do it. I get it. Eventually, somebody's going to take over Star Trek, and they're going to be like, you know what? This is the canonical universe, and all of this mishigas over here was all alternate universe crap. So the evolution of Star Trek is not going from the Discovery, the Crossfield class, to the Constitution class. Fuck all that shit. Listen to your Uncle Bob. None of that's, it's all bullshit. Don't even try and make it all fit in, because it won't. It might have gone, if they used the Ralph McQuarrie design, maybe from Planet of the Titans you could buy off on it, but no. I know I've completely lost everybody. I haven't even had enough to drink tonight. I'm just going off. But on that note, Scott Bartholomew says director Carlos, is it Baena, is here. You mean the guy who made this? Well, if he's really here, kudos to you, sir, because what you did was amazing. And why don't they let you make a feature? Make the feature, which is great. I would love to see that happen. But you've done some, as Gaff said at the end of Blade Runner, you've done a man's job, sir. Everybody at Otoy, fantastic. Major Chai Chai says, the Onion Ninjas got to me too when I watched it. The Onion Ninjas. I know, right? I'm telling you. The Robo Producer says, Star Trek 3 is still my favorite. Well, you're wrong, but that's okay. I know Star Trek 3 gets a lot of love from people. Trek, Darth Plato says, Trek was a trinity. No McCoy in this hurts. Well, it's true. But beggars can't be choosers, And remember, the reason why McCoy isn't in this is because McCoy is probably still alive. What's wrong with not having died? That's why McCoy isn't in it. From a canonical standpoint, he's not in it because he's still alive. I'd like to believe he's still alive. Admiral McCoy is still alive. And I'll bet you they had that conversation too. I bet the Akutas probably said, what if he could still be alive? Why not? That's why he's not there. Because he hasn't died yet. That's why. But it's a good question to ask. And on that note, I'm going to get off this crazy show. I didn't do such a very good job of explaining the Otoy stuff, but go watch it. Remember, there's 4 of them. And go look them all up. And I'll do my supercut and put it up on YouTube and get flagged for it. But I want to thank everybody for being here on the 999th episode of Robservations. Got a little crazy tonight and all that, but overwhelmed with emotion about what Otoy did. And get that Vision Pro. I hope they get to do all kinds of things. Yeah. And I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via Super Chats and tips. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator. And we're going to hear from all of you for the 1,000th episode of Robservations. 1,000 episodes. The Dead Man sent in a $20 Super Chat and says, hey, Rob, happy birthday. The only thing I know about Dune is the new movies. I was very confused with Dune Prophecy. Anyway, when I first watched Generations, I thought Picard was going to bring Kirk into the 21st century. I already read that, but I'll read it again because why not? I guess I did read everything. I haven't missed anything. So there we go. I think I've got everybody's questions. I think I got it. So yeah, I guess I did. So that'll be it. And anybody else that was here moderating, I don't know, Tom, if anybody else was here. Thanks for being you. And on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And we're going to listen to what you, imagination connoisseurs, have to say this Saturday beginning at 8 a.m. Pacific for a 16-hour Robservations. I don't know how that's going to go, but we'll see. And on that note, I say to everyone, have a better night. And, of course, live long and prosper. Live long and prosper. I shall do neither. I have killed my captain. What episode? I'll leave that for you to say in the chat. Don't look it up. You got to know.